Welcome to this Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2023 Minnesota Book Award finalists in the competitive children's literature category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's book awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota. So a warm welcome to our audience and to our Minnesota Book Award finalists who are here today. My name is Caren Stelson, and I will be your moderator for our conversation together. I'm both excited and honored to be with you, with our authors today, and I am excited for all of you. Congratulations for being Minnesota Book Award finalists. I know how exciting this can be because I've been in your shoes. I was a finalist twice. Once for this book, Sachiko, for the middle grade category, and that was in 2017. And then for A Bowl Full of Peace, in the picture book category in 2021. I'm also aware that as authors, we are working in what we might call the slow arts. It can take years before our books find their way into the world. And in the meantime, we're working on other stories. I am, and I'm sure you are too. So to think back about how you felt writing your book, I can imagine maybe that's challenging, but don't hold back. Give us your memories and know that we are really eager to listen. Children's writer and Caldecott illustrator Uri Sholowitz wrote, "Every picture book has 3 stories. The first is how the book came to be, which is interesting in its own right, but maybe unknown to us. The second is the one told in the book. And the third is what lingers in the reader's mind after it ends." Each of your books has these 3 stories in one. I hope as you share and talk about your books, the rest of us will get a glimpse of the marvelous layers in these stories and your deep work as authors, writing for the most precious audience a writer can have, children. I'd like to, before we really get into our discussion, share a land acknowledgement. The Dakota people, the indigenous keepers of the land on which most of us on this panel recording are participating from today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of story in this place now called Minnesota. The Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Awards, honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we all work together to lift up storytellers in our state. So now, finally, I'd love to introduce all of you. And this is really one of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalist series. So I would like to introduce Bao Phi, author of You Are Life, illustrated by Hannah Lee and published by Capstone Editions. Lauren Stringer, author of The Dark Was Done, illustrated by Lauren Stringer and published by Beach Lane Books, part of Simon & Schuster. Kristen Schroeder, author of So Much Snow, illustrated by Sarah Jacoby, and published by Random House Studio, part of Penguin Random House. And Sunyan Shin and John Coy, co-authors of Where We Come From, as well as co-authors Diane Wilson and Shannon Gibney, who could not be here today. Their book was illustrated by Diane MBD and published by Carol Rhoda Books, part of Lerner Publishing. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round robin question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn. I'll then have a question or a follow-up question specifically for you and your beautiful books. So I hope we can start with you. And before I ask sort of the general question, would you be willing to share the cover of your beautiful book, You Are Life, and just read a few of those pages so we can just have the flavor of your voice and the words, and also the illustrator, Hannah Lee.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So this is You Are Life. This is my fourth picture book with capstone, written by me and illustrated by Hannah Lee. This is the cover, You Are Life. You are life. A raft, a lighthouse, an outstretched hand. You are not a virus. When you were born, you saved me.
Thank you. That just gives us just such a sweet taste of what this book has to offer as those pages are turned. So beautiful.
Thank you.
Here's the group question.
Mm-hmm.
And I am in this work like you are, so I was thinking about these questions myself.
Mm.
Our picture books are our heart's gift to send out into the world. We hope our young readers will take away something new to wonder about and process. As we create our stories, we as authors also set in motion something for ourselves to wonder and process too. What did you learn about yourself while writing this picture book, You Are Life? How did this particular book stretch you as a person, a writer, an artist?
That's a really great question. So I had written this during the pandemic, and witnessing the re-rise of anti-Asian violence. Of course, those of us who study Asian American history know that this is nothing new. You don't even have to go that far back to post 9/11, and anyone who was presenting as brown, Asian, presenting as Arab, faced whether they were Arab or not, faced a lot of violence. Certainly, Asian bodies did. And of course, you can go back to the beginning of this country's bloody history of colonization, right? With, the lynchings and burnings of Chinatowns, the internment of Japanese Americans, and various hate crimes against Asian Americans that are barely noted to anyone, right? But to see it during the pandemic, to see my people scapegoated, and to wonder how Asian American children in particular, how they would get through this unscathed, if that possible. I mean, maybe that's not even possible. Maybe unscathed is not the right word. Maybe it's, can they have something during this time that tells them that they're beautiful? And going back to your question, what did I learn about myself? Well, I wrote this coming out of a profound anger and resentment towards everyone, really, because I saw what was happening to Asian American people as a double violence. So there was, of course, the violence itself, the many cases of violence itself, and the other violence was the gaslighting, which was, oh, well, that's not really racist. You know, Asian people don't really experience racism. So really, it was a double violence. And I, as a human being, as an Asian American, was very frustrated and very angry. And what I learned about myself is that I believe that kids, when you're writing for kids, they can take a lot, right? They can take a lot. They're in this world. We can't pretend that they don't see these things. But at the same time, I don't think that my anger and my resentment was the right vessel for a children's book. And I felt like I needed to lay down a different track, and that was love and hope, right? Um, for all children, of course, all children, but especially in that moment, Asian American children. And that I mean, I learned a different way to book this moment of history for my people. That what I learned is I have the ability, I guess, to hope and love instead of being consumed by hate.
Thank you. I think we've all living through the pandemic and witnessing what you just said. And some of us experiencing it, and I also add anti-Semitism as well. And how do we help our kids navigate through all that and give them that inner strength, which I think Your Life does also. Thank you.
Oh no, absolutely. And as you added anti-Semitism, of course, anti-Blackness, the murder of George Floyd, the continued occupation of this land, of which the genocide of the original people is all on our hands as we live in this country, and the continued exploited labor and resources of my people, of Latinx people, of Arab people. All of these things are really important, and all of these things, and white kids, female identified people, queer, trans people, people with disabilities. We all have intersections and struggles, and of course. And I wanted to write something about the uniqueness of my people, and to celebrate the kids and to show them love. I'm a writer. This is what I do.
Yeah. So beautifully stated. And so critical, particularly at this point in the times we're living in. And Lauren?
Thank you, Caren, and thank you for that question, and thank you for that great introduction. I'm going to first share screen. This is the cover for The Dark Was Done. You can see it is the dark, and I'll start reading it. It begins with, "The dark was tired of hiding." And I always ask the person that I'm reading it to if they can see the dark in that dark closet, because sometimes you just see a dark closet, but if you look carefully, you'll begin to see an animated dark. So take a hard look. The dark was tired of hiding. Night lights, street lights, flashlights, and table lamps all pushed the dark away. Everyone was afraid of the dark. Everyone wished the dark would leave. Even the boy who loved the song of crickets was afraid of the dark under his bed. Even he wished the dark would leave. And so, the dark decided to go. All the world over, continent by continent, ocean by ocean, the dark left and did not return. The dark was done. I'm going to stop there. What did I learn when making this book? The book, I started actually way back, the story I began in 2016. And it was a time when I felt our entire world was turning towards fear. Our entire country was turning towards fear. And I felt it, all my friends were feeling it. And I always check in with my child self. And I remember when as a child, I was afraid of the dark. And what did I do with all of that? And how could I turn the fear I was feeling in the present as an adult into the fear, into facing the fear of when I was a child. I was afraid of the dark under my bed. I would wake up in the middle of the night and want to leave my bed and stand on it and leap out as far as I could from the bed because I was certain something under the bed would grab me, something dark. Anyhow, thinking about this fear that was kind of in the zeitgeist of the whole culture, I started thinking I would write a book about the dark and make the dark an entity that would be alive. And in the writing of the book, I realized that I was not just dealing with fear. What I was dealing with was love, that in pushing away what we fear, we end up losing a lot of what we love. And that's, I guess, a little abstract when you think about the dark under the bed, but I just kept thinking about the dark and everything that comes with the dark. The stars we don't see the stars until it gets dark. We don't see the moon until well, sometimes we see the child's moon in the daytime, but mostly we see the moon at night, and it's always at night that we go running out to see the stars if we can. And so ultimately, I feel like this is a love story, discovering what you love in what you fear. And that's kind of where I went to with the book. I'll leave it at that. Caren, you're
Yep. I just want to say that was beautiful, and I have my copy here and I love it as well. So thank you. Thank you for writing it.
you're welcome.
Can we go to Lauren? I mean, sorry, Kristen. Well, thank you, Lauren. And there is in that question, how did your particular book, So Much Snow, stretch you as a person, a writer, an artist? Because we are all that, even if we're not illustrating.
This is true. Thank you. Thanks, Caren. And so good to be with everybody today. I will share my screen so I can show you a little bit here.
See it, and it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Okay. All right. Well, this is the cover, so wonderfully illustrated by Sarah Jacoby, with the bear and the So Much Snow. And it starts here with, on Monday, it starts to snow. Silent swirling. How high will it go? On Tuesday, we get more snow. Flakes floating. How high will it go? On Wednesday, still more snow. Peaceful piling. How high will it go? On Thursday, the snow doesn't slow. Fields filling. How high will it go? And that's what I've got for my story. You have to read the rest. Did you want me to go ahead and answer that question now?
Please. It's such a beautiful book. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Reader.
So I guess when I had the idea for this book, no one in Minnesota will be surprised to know it was the month of February. And I distinctly remember looking outside and thinking, we are not done yet. And we're not even done for a while. Like it's a few months of solid winter here still. And I had the idea of a snowstorm that was kind of accumulating and then coming down on the other side. And I was thinking about the animals and how they would react to that, from small to large. And then I had the thinking of the days of the week. So honestly, the idea came to me fairly whole, which is unusual in that, that we all know sometimes it's chipping away, trying all different angles. But yet in this case, I did have the idea, but it was very different to anything I'd ever written before. So my challenge was, at the time I was writing mostly humorous stories. I was writing mostly humorous picture books at that point. And so I was trying to think, will this be a funny book? And I started writing it, and it wasn't very funny in my mind. And so I sent it to my agent and I said, I don't know what this is. Is this a book? Is this a concept book? Does it work? I really didn't have a strong feeling about it, to be honest. I was concerned that it wasn't working. But my agent and assistant agent, Krista Heschke and Danielle Hunter, they really liked it. And so they were very encouraging and helped me smooth some of the edges out, because I was very afraid of any kind of rhyming, because we've been told, like, don't approach that unless it's perfect. And so there were rhyming phrases in So Much Snow, but it's not a rhyming book. I wouldn't call it a rhyming book. So yeah, that was my challenge, was pushing myself out of my comfort zone to write something that felt unfamiliar, that I didn't have a lot of confidence in at first, but trying something new. So they helped me sort of, like I said, smooth that out a little bit. And then when they told me they put it out on submission, I did panic a little bit, because I just thought, oh no, like maybe it's not ready, or, the fear of rejection, that kind of thing. So I was very, very surprised when, I don't know, maybe 6 months later, it was purchased by Annie Kelly at Random House Studios, because I actually thought, like, maybe we should just pull it. I was that concerned about it, the insecurities of a writer. Yeah, so it did push me, but then I learned a valuable lesson around not being fearful to try new things. And you just never really know which book or that you write is going to resonate, and keep trying different things, and who knows.
Kristen, thank you so much. I do have yours as well, and it's just such a gorgeous book, both in illustration and in your words. And I've read it many times. So thank you so much.
Are you responsible, Kristen, for the winter we've had now?
I feel like I could have had some kind of, like, I don't know, I'm a little bit worried, but I just wrote a book about spring, like a really nice, beautiful spring. So I'm thinking, like, in 3 or 4 years from now, if I do have that power, then we're in for, and this book sells, then it'll be a great spring, right? No, it's just a funny coincidence that it's been our 3rd snowiest winter of all time when the book came out.
Yeah, we're not done yet either.
We're coming to Kristen and with that crystal ball, the weather crystal ball. Oh, well, let's shift, Kristen, thank you so much. And let's shift to John Coy and Sun Young Shin, and your beautiful book, Where We Come From.
Thanks, Caren. It's so good to be here. And I'm just going to read a couple of pages from our book, Where We Come From. We come from stardust, our bodies made of ancient elements. We come from single cells evolving over billions of years, as did all life on Earth, bacteria, trees, animals. In time, we became humans who spread out around the world. We come from place, language, and spirit, and each of us comes from story.
Oh, so beautiful.
So, thank you for listening and viewing those pages with us. And to answer your lovely question, I'll say a little bit, and then maybe John can say a little bit. I'll say that one of the things that I learned was really that that I think I could say that poetry was our solution. And we started, when we were kicking around ideas at the beginning, one of our thoughts was maybe it should be a narrative with multiple characters, and but we quickly moved, I think pretty quickly moved on from that idea. And I can't remember exactly why. It wasn't a strong no, let's for sure not do that, but in my mind, I think that what we ended up doing worked a lot better than a narrative, which for me, I kept struggling with the idea of how would something like that maybe not be sort of lessony or like preachy, or we didn't want it to be that kind of like, here's the moral of the story type of, at least I didn't, or, you know, we're always trying to not have a story that is like scolding children or, you know, teaching them like, we as adults know better. Here's the solution to this thorny problem. So I'll say that. And as the poet of the four, you know, I felt very affirmed that we landed on poetry pretty organically, or just telling it in verse. You know, we don't have to call it poetry. It really doesn't matter. But I was really happy with how that turned out.
Yes, I echo Sun Young in saying, thanks, Caren, for having this conversation, and thanks, Lauren and Kristen and Bao and Diane and Shannon and Sun Young for being part of this just amazing group. I think one of the things I learned about myself in this process was just how much this story called for collaboration, and how much I enjoyed the collaborative process of writing with three just extraordinarily talented women. And we would go back and forth. So, I'd see what they wrote and thought, I've got to write something better than what I've got. And we only met one time in person, and then the pandemic hit. So every Monday we would get together on Zoom and take a look at what we'd written that week. And just having that was so grounding in those early days of the pandemic, having a project underway and having people who I knew I was going to see. And then, just like Sun Young said, we just kind of wrote our way into this story together. And later we found out that Dion, the illustrator, was already fully booked, but when he read it, he said, no, I have to illustrate that. And he told, in an interview, he said, this is the book he would have written if he wrote a story. And so that just felt so affirming to us. And we felt like we just were incredibly lucky to get him as an illustrator, because he did just an extraordinary job with it.
Thank you. And I have my copy of this too. And it is beautiful and informative. And we'll learn more about it. But thank you for all four of you, and two of you are here, for writing where we come from. I'm going to shift into another question that's more specific. In your poem, Refugee Requiem, that I listened to, and I believe you shared that at the Asian American Writers Workshop, you poetically spoke to your family's trauma from the Vietnam War, that it's become part of your DNA, and perhaps your daughter's too. You Are Life is just a beautiful poem with these themes. At least that's how I read it. One of the most touching and powerful line is, when you were born, you saved me. Could you expand on that tender sentence and how that sentence may have led to the rest of your life?
Yes, thank you. So just a really quick point. Obviously, you didn't know this, but when I wrote Refugee Requiem, that poem, my child identified as female. My child no longer identifies as female. Their pronouns are they, them. So just as an aside,
Thank you.
or not as an aside, as an important
Yes,
intervention.
absolutely. No, I did not know that, but thank you.
Yeah, you didn't know. You didn't know. And I should have said something before. I apologize for that. So first of all, we never talk about mental health in this country, and I think things are changing a little bit. I mean, certainly, I think they're different from 20 years ago. But for example, I was born during the war, during a tremendously traumatic experience for my family and myself. That the Exodus was violent and terrifying, but I never knew that I could claim that as part of
Mm.
who I was in my experience because I was so young that I don't remember it. And it wasn't until I was an adult in my mid 30s that people were like, no, you were there and it had an effect on you. And I didn't, and until I had that realization, there were so many things about myself that I struggled with that didn't make any sense to me until I was able to own that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
and I just wonder how many instances there are of people out there who would just benefit from just knowing that these things do have an effect on us. How helpful that would be. So just a plug that we really need to be more open and talk about mental health. And when my kid was born, I was afraid to have children for many reasons. One of them being like, how can you raise a kid in a world like this? And obviously, my kid was born before the pandemic, but exactly that type of stuff. You know, not just the pandemic itself, but people's selfishness, people's racism, people's sexism, all of that type of stuff. It's like, how can you bring a kid into a world like this when stuff like that can happen? And I'm older and I know that stuff can happen, right? Some form of it can happen. And how can you consciously bring a child into a world like this? But I made the leap, and there was a way in which that line is very true, that I was, not in a great place as a person, I think, in my life, before I had a kid. And there's a way in which having a kid can be a place where you really need to shift your priorities, and you really need to ask yourself some really difficult questions, and you really need to get your life together because somebody else now depends on you for the rest of their life, right? Hopefully they'll live longer than you. And so I think that was very much true, that even though I was apprehensive, um, this little being coming into my world, as difficult as it is being a parent, I don't want to romanticize being a parent. It is, though, by far the most difficult thing I've ever done, and nothing is even remotely close to how difficult being a parent is. But it also really forced me to become a better person.
Mm.
And because now I have someone to live for, someone who needs me, and someone who needs me to be a better person than I was. And so I really, it's just a true line in the book. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is a true line, and
Mm.
it really hits home for me, and I can even speak to grandparenting now, and
Mm.
even more so.
Mm.
And I think there's so much of what you're saying, but I think any of us who experience war in families, we carry that,
Right.
no matter how many generations.
Mm.
If I have one more question that expands on, I think it expands on both of your answers.
Mm.
And that it's, to me, picture books are about hope. And Your Life is full of hope. What are your hopes for your life out in the world?
Mm.
What do you hope adults and children will notice most? There's a lot of hope in these.
Yeah.
This question.
Yeah.
What conversations will you hope adults have with children after reading your book?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you hope that they will remember the most?
Mm-hmm. Well, at base, right? Those of us who are creators, who are writers, who are book creators, we want our art to reach the hands of the people who need it the most, right? And need can mean a lot of different things. So that could be an Asian person who needs to be validated, who needs to see this poem, this art, this story, beautifully illustrated by Hannah Lee. It could mean that. It could mean someone who hates Asian people or doesn't like Asian people. Maybe they needed to read it and be like, oh, maybe I need to really think about some stereotypes that I have or some bigotry that I have, right? So in the widest sense, as an artist, you're always hoping your work reaches those who need it, whatever that need may be. And then the other, I think, more pragmatic thing is, like, again, the continued, dismissal of the Asian American experience and our place in this country's bloody history is what I've spent my life intervening in, right? And I feel like if this pandemic and the horrific anti-Asian violence that continued throughout it is not a wake-up call to people to ask themselves, hey, maybe I really should find out more about Asian people. I don't know what else is going to do it, And so I hope that this book is also going to do that, where, again, for those Asian Americans who already know the history are like, oh, like I get this book, I understand it, I'm glad it's there for them. And then for people who, again, have no regard for Asian American history or think it's not even a thing or important, then, I hope that they, I hope that it's something that can hopefully move them in a direction where they have a more of a curiosity about my people. And, I'll say that, like, just because the pandemic is over, the pandemic's not even over, but, as we reemerge into a different circumstance, there's always the looming fear of China and different countries in Asia. And those of us who study Asian American history, we know that even Asian Americans who have nothing to do with those countries, we're going to suffer the most if bad things happen between our countries. Does that make sense? Again, throughout history, Japanese American internment happened even though most Japanese people who were interned had nothing to do with the Japanese Empire. Vincent Chin was murdered by 2 out-of-work Detroit auto workers who blamed him for the loss of their jobs. He had nothing to do with cars or the auto industry. And the list goes on and on. After 9/11, again, Asian Indians, brown, Arab presenting brown Asians, Arab people were blamed for 9/11, even if they had nothing to do with it, right? They had nothing to do with it, right? Like, I just hope that this book and other works like it are an intervention for people to realize, hey, that's wrong, and that's a thing, and that's actually racist, right? And it sounds so simple, and that's why it's so painful to have to keep speaking up on it. It's like, it's so simple, and yet people refuse to acknowledge it. So.
Well, it's I think, complex in how we come to one another, and it should be simple. And I hope we, teachers and parents and adults, wrap their arms around your book, Your Life, and definitely invite every little small person around them to come sit next to them to read this. I have so many questions, and I sort of have them. They look like just a few, but I think there are a number of them in one. But I think this is a question that many of us would have, and here it is. And to remind our audience, The Dark Was Done is Lauren's book. Most of us writing picture books don't have the artistic skill to also illustrate our own work, even though we wish maybe we did. You've had the role of illustrator and author illustrator. Can you share, generally the process of being both writer and illustrator rolled up into one heart, mind, and body? How does that work?
I will try. as you said, I do both. I've illustrated more books than I've written, and I began as an illustrator. I've loved getting people's stories that I fall in love with. And my editor will send me stories to consider. And if I can see in my mind's eye at least 1 or 2 images that really excite me, then I will definitely take that book and expand on it and turn it into the 32-page picture book that it should be. I had the luxury of illustrating stories by Mary Lynn Ray, Cynthia Rylant, Mem Fox. I learned from like the stars. Their words, the way they write is extraordinary. And when you take on a book to illustrate, you live with that story. It's not just reading it and closing it. You live with it. And I actually, the first thing I do when I take a story is I write it really large and put it on my wall. And actually I'm working on one now, and you can kind of see how big it kind of takes up. It's on a diagonal wall there, but the stories are always on my wall. So they're inside me, they're all around me. And that's, the words are feeding my responses on a daily basis. So learning from them, I find that I get the rhythms. And if an idea comes to me, I start to write. And The Dark Was Done, as I said earlier, came from being in a time of fear, but it also began when I was on a writing retreat for a week on an island on Rainy Lake. And that's where you can see the stars because there's no city lights. So every night I'd be just under a dome of stars, and sometimes the northern lights if you're lucky. And the rhythm of the lake, the lapping of the lake, just constant, started this rhythm as I began writing the story. And the rhythms came in the story as the lines are repeated. When I read the story, you met the character of the dark, but I knew that there had to be more characters. There had to be someone, and it turned out to be a little boy. The little boy who loved the song of crickets decides that he misses the crickets so much, he misses the owls hooting, he misses the stars at night and the bats flying, that he has to go and find the dark. And as he's heading out looking for the dark, he meets more characters. And when I was writing it, I should go back just real quick. When I said that I get an author's story to consider illustrating, and 1 or 2 lines like conjure images, it's the same when I write a story. I'm not going to illustrate, since I was trained to kind of take the story and illustrate it, I have never started with the illustrations first. But if I start writing a line and suddenly an image comes, then it's like, oh, and if it's an image I fell in love with, and I fell in love with the dark. I knew that I wanted this creature, almost like an octopus, that could expand, to fill the entire universe, but could also get so tiny it could fit in your pocket, because our pockets are filled with dark. So I was so excited about the idea of illustrating the dark that I knew I had to write the story. So, but I also had the other characters. And for a while I had an astronomer, I had an artist, I had a bear, I had all these interesting different characters. And I settled on a little boy, and then I wanted some darkness within the darkness, so I chose to have a burglar, partly because I love the word burglar, but also I thought it would be kind of fun to illustrate a burglar. And I did read The Three Robbers many times to my kids by Tommy Ungerer, and knew that you can make robbers and burglars look a little, or seem fun. And there's something about the dark that offers mystery, and I decided that had to be a poet. So there's a poet in the story. And finally, a gardener, and the gardener's kind of a witch, and each of them misses something different in the dark. The gardener misses the smell of night blooming jasmine. The poet misses the mystery. He can't write poems without mystery. And the burglar misses shadows to hide in. And as I worked on the characters, I saw it as a play. So it feels people aren't dressed in normal clothes. Generally, the continent isn't true to our Earth. I wanted it to feel like more like a fairy tale or a theater piece. And so it was a constant kind of push and pull and push and pull. You ask me, sometimes sometimes the pictures would come in the middle, and I was right in the midst of writing it, and I suddenly did this little quick cartoon of the storyboard of what it could be. None of that language continued on, but the sense of this big looming darkness leaving the earth to just light. I'll show you some of the characters. Here's the little boy who loves the Song of Crickets. Here's the burglar. The poet who misses the mystery that he could find in the dark. The gardener, a bit like a witch, conjuring up lots of things from her garden. And of course, you met the dark. This was the first drawing of the dark that I did. Feels a little bit more octopusy with those tentacles. And I just want to share one quick story about creating as you go along, and I'm sending drawings of the illustrations to my editor, and we've pretty much edited the script, or the manuscript. It was kind of like a theater for me. She was staying at her father's house on Malibu, and she kept being visited by raccoons. And she sent, when I had sent her the picture of the burglar, she sent me this photo, and she said, "Raccoons are visiting me and they remind me of your burglar." So we began calling them the burglars, and she would every night send me more photos of the burglars that were visiting her house. And right before the book went to print, I said, wait. This little guy, I need to make a quick change. And luckily, thanks to all kinds of digital things, I was able to turn that burglar into a raccoon just by giving him a tail. So that's the beauty of having a fairy tale, that even animals can come alive and turn into the burglars. So it's kind of a combination of both. I tend to start with the words just because I think that's how I was trained as an illustrator, to begin with a finished manuscript and then push and pull. Though I have found, I will say, as an illustrator, often the author has lived with the words for so long and given them away. And you mentioned, Caren, how long it can be for a book to be turned into a illustrated picture book, and sometimes years can go by. And I will find the words, and as I start to paginate them, putting them on different pages, I will suddenly feel like maybe there's too many words. And of course, I don't go to the author to say this. I'll talk with the editor. And it could have been 3 or 4 years since they even read it, because it's been waiting. And so it always becomes a collaboration of words and pictures, even in the midst of it. So things change and switch around.
Wow. Thank you, Lauren. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
There's you shared some very deliberate choices you've made, both in illustrating and in writing, and of course we are all making very deliberate choices. But I want to ask you about one choice, and this is I got this idea because I was reading The Dark Was Done to my 5-year-old grandson, and his name is Reed, and we came across the word persuade as when the boy says, "I'm going to find the dark and persuade the dark to return." And Reed and I had a nuanced discussion about the word persuade and why you, as the author, may have chosen that word rather than asked or told. So I was curious, that choice of persuade, because I thought it was pretty powerful, and any other really deliberate choices you might want to share with us that was that were going through your mind.
I deliberately choose the word persuade. Part of it, by that time, I was very emotionally inside the story, and the dark left because the dark was not feeling loved. The dark felt completely ignored. People were afraid of it. People had pushed the dark away, and the dark hopefully knew all the gifts that the dark had and just said, okay, I'm done. and was off. And to just go to someone who's left because they feel unloved and say, come on back, it's not going to work, because there was a lot of damage done. You know, the dark, I'm reluctant to give it a gender, and that's why it's always the dark, which set up the entire rhythm of the book. I kept he or she out of it, but forgive me if I fall into it. Anyway, when the boy decided that he had to go to get the dark, just asking the dark wouldn't be enough, and just certainly couldn't say, get back here. That would be too bold and rude, I think, a different story. And persuade to me is sort of a promise. We promise we will love you if you come back. Persuade is, look, we really do. We see our mistakes. We want you to come back. And I also really love words, and I love what can happen in a picture book when you offer a few words that are unusual to the reader, because I think it's this, you're inside the story by the time you hear the word persuade, and it comes up. It's a bigger word than most little kids hear. And it's an opportunity, just like what you did with Read, to say, well, what does this word mean? And why do you think the author chose this word? That kind of thing. So well done, Caren. And also a beautiful word, don't you think? Persuade. I don't know. It's just, it's an offering. And luckily the dark, not to give away the ending, but the dark is persuaded to return. So.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So beautiful. Oh, I'm having a great time. I hope you are too. Oh, Kristen, if we can shift to you, and so much snow. Where is so much snow? Here it is, right here. And a big shift in theme for us, but I have a couple questions for you too, specifically for this story. So here it goes. With all the snow in Minnesota, your picture book, So Much Snow, captured what Minnesotans experienced, all of us, this winter. But I read that you lived in Australia for 11 years. And so when you moved here, it must have been a big cultural climatic shock moving to Minnesota. Can you speak more about your experiences and sensitivities to Minnesota's climate and animals that may have contributed to the creating of So Much Snow?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Minnesota. And I would say over the years, I kept trying to get away from the cold weather. I went to Arizona for college for a few years. I came back. I did graduate from the University of Minnesota. And then later I did end up moving to Australia, and I stayed there for 11 years. I met my husband there. My children were born there. We're all dual citizens. But we did end up moving. Well, I say moving back. I was the only one moving back, but I brought my Aussie husband and children with me when they were pretty small, around school age. So to be closer to family. And also, honestly, I did miss the Four Seasons. And it's been interesting as a family. I think I was more worried about sort of how my husband would react, because he would say to me, like, you know what it's like. So I sort of did an internal check with myself and a promise to myself to not complain about the weather. So I know I'm signing up for this again. And I was a little bit worried for him in terms of how he would handle it, but he's actually become sort of an ambassador for Minnesota. He really loves it here, and he gets a lot of questions about, what are you doing here? Like, people will hear his accent and they'll say, where are you from? Australia? What are you doing here? And he says, I love it here. It's great. He's like, have you lived any other places? And then he'll talk about the things that he likes about Minnesota. So he's a Minnesotan now as well. I've converted another one. But yeah, I did miss the 4 seasons. I'll say, like, I'm not gonna lie, winter gets a little long for me, and I think everybody, which is why I incorporated and I don't want to give it away, but the ending of So Much Snow, if you haven't read it, is, I think, all of us in spring and April in particular. So yeah, that hopefully that answers a little bit about my background in Minnesota and my connection to the state, as well as the highs and the low, the seasonal highs and lows, let's call them.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you can feel the love of Minnesota in this book. I do have another question, because the illustrations just beautifully match your words. It's just a true picture book. You keep coming back to it. You keep exploring more. The sweet faces of the animals are just so appealing to young children. And there's this patterning, repetition to it. So I was wondering if you can describe the process, and maybe you already have, but maybe you might be able to add a little more to it. Can you describe the process of making So Much Snow as you worked, maybe with your editor and through the illustrator through the editor, just discussing maybe if you embedded more elements that young children would come back to, the surprises in it that you can find first reading, fifth reading, and maybe what was one of your biggest surprises?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just going to give full credit to Sarah, because I did not go back and forth with her, really. I mean, I was lucky that when my editor, Annie Kelly, she was discussing her vision for the book, and she had Sarah in mind right away. And one of the things she said was, her animals are the cutest. And I said, okay, I love that. and I'm all for cute animals, who isn't? So yeah, when I first saw it, I think, all my surprises were positive. I was thrilled. And so, just seeing the cover and the adorable bear, I was in love with that. A surprise, it's still in a good way, but just something I couldn't have thought of myself, was the way that she depicted the snow. With the circular kind of piece to it. I had no idea how the snow was going to look, and I thought it was just such a unique way for her to represent it, especially in the beginning with the flakes. Because as we know, snow comes in so many different shapes and sizes and forms, and she has incorporated that throughout too, where it's more, light and blizzardy and things like that. So I think she's from Pennsylvania, so she's had some experience with snow. But yeah, I love that. That was a very pleasant surprise. And I was just overall 100% thrilled with the way that she took the words and incorporated that into her art.
Yeah, it just worked so, excuse me, so beautifully. And again, our picture books are meant to be, we really have the widest audience. We have our children reading them, but of course, we hope there's an adult sitting next to them, and they have a little read next to me again. And we just discovered, just the layers. Oh, there's the days of the week and the circular aspect and the rhythm to it. And it's, a picture book that you keep coming back to. So thank you. Just really does a wonderful job. So let's segue into where we come from. And this is that marvelous cover. It's just so beautiful. And a very different, again, a different picture book, a different presentation. And John and Sun Young, I'm so glad you're here to share more about it with us. So I think this is a question, again, everybody would want to ask or want an answer for. It's so unusual for 4 authors coming together to write one beautifully written and illustrated and designed picture book. So where we are from begs for the question, where is this book from? I know you spoke a little bit about the origins, but how did you come together to even start this project? Maybe a little bit more of your group process? It's interesting how some of our work has come out of the pandemic too. So that's something, a mark in history. And I know this is one question rule, but there are a couple of questions in this. Your group process, what did you learn from each other? And how does this deeper learning impact the feel of the book? Take it away.
I'm going to kick this to John, the first part, because actually I would love to hear him talk about what he thought his book was going to be about first, because the seed was John's. It was John's idea.
Thanks, Sun Young, for dodging that question. I think it's a topic that I've thought about for a long time, and I'm always drawn to writers who think deeply about this topic. And so I had a manuscript that I was working on with editor Carol Hinds, and the more we worked on it and the more we talked about it, the more we realized this story just called for multiple voices. And as you get into working on a picture book, as Lauren's talked about and as Kristen's talked about, the story starts to take over and the story starts to need certain things. And so I talked with Carol and said, I think we need other voices with this. Carol's just a brilliant editor. She thought so too. She said, do you have anybody in mind? I said, yeah, I do have some people. Some of the people I had in mind were the same people Carol had in mind. And I was lucky enough that the three people I had in mind, Diane, Sun Young, and Shannon, all said yes, even though it was incredibly vague what it was we were doing. We were just going to write a book about where we come from together. And I knew all three of them had spent substantial time thinking about this question and writing about it. And I loved the way they explored this question so deeply. And so that is how we started. And that process of going back and forth was just an absolute gift for me, because it's not the way we usually write. We're really encouraged to think of writing as a solitary activity, but all kinds of other arts, and particularly arts with, from different cultures, collaboration is just an automatic part of it. And we have such an emphasis on individuality here that I don't even think we've examined sometimes how that affects the process of how we work. But this process of collaboration, it was so rich. This book is such a different book, exactly as you pointed out, Caren, because of the process of working together with Sun Young, Shannon, and Diane.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I echo all of that. And I can say that I can definitely point to different things throughout the book that when I read them in first draft, inspired me to take my writing in a particular nuance or direction. Like, for example, Diane's pages are really lush, and some of the descriptions are really tactile and sensory. And so that was a good reminder to me to not be too abstract, and to one, give our illustrator things to illustrate, but then also to because we start with evolution and the cosmos, but we want to bring it really quickly, I think, to the body and to community and So that was something that I really appreciated about the process, and my co-writers throughout, and I will always jump at an opportunity to collaborate because it's just, yeah, the camaraderie, the community makes me a better writer. I just learned so much. Also, I mean, John has written so many amazing storybooks, picture books, middle grade novels, and more that I knew that I would learn a lot. This is my second picture book. I have another one coming out that I'm working on with Carol and Maylena Mungal. And so, I was really new to it. And Diane was her first really picture book, and Shannon, she has one coming out just now, but this came out first. So we were, all of us were much newer. So we all got to learn a lot from John and from Carol. So that was really just a huge blessing and gift.
And Caren, in answer to your question too, I think that collaborative process was so rich and valuable for us that then when Diane was chosen as the illustrator, that process continued to be much more collaborative than usual. So what Kristen was describing earlier, that's pretty typical of author and illustrator being kept separate. But with this one, Diane was really interested in showing us sketches, getting feedback from us. You can probably guess that he got a lot of feedback from the four of us. At one point I was concerned it was too much feedback, and Diane said, no, this is all incredibly helpful. So we give really, really specific feedback. I want to share the screen just a second again, just to show what he did here early. And some of this just was so, it kind of felt like he was part of our collaborative process all along. So this is Diane's introductory page here of coming from Minnesota Makoche. And you see on the right that shadow in the picture, and that later comes back. And then, of course, you have to look a little bit more closely for that outline of the shadow in Korea for Sun Young. And then we go to Ann Arbor for Shannon. And it's done so differently each time. And then here down at the waterfall in Minneapolis. And I think that there was something about that back and forth with Diane that really made me realize how, if you get the right people working together, letting the artist and letting the writers have more back and forth can really result in some amazing stuff. And maybe it's an example, Lauren, of what you're talking earlier about something. I think the reason for keeping it separate is fear. They fear the writers are going to get out of hand. I can understand that fear. But if you got the right collaborators and the right editor and art director, then some extraordinary things can happen too. So I'm really grateful to Carol as the editor, Danielle Carnito as the art director, and Viet Chu as the designer for being so open to having the writers involved in the back and forth.
Now that's so interesting. Thank you so much. I wanted to, I kept staring at, I don't know if you could see this, but there's that picture of the four of you in the back, and you look so happy and such good friends. And I thought, wow, that's what collaboration does. Just so brings us together and in good work and friendship. So it just shows up.
We're pretty sure that that's the only author photograph that's ever been taken at Bancroft Meadows Park.
Is that where it's? Probably. And I know that, I think that's your comment about having that collaboration among all players, just can, when they're the right people coming together, it produces amazing quality work. I have one more question for the two of you. And this is because as a nonfiction, call it nonfiction. In the back, you have just fabulous back matter. And I am, and it's back here with more information. I'm a big fan of back matter. I use it also in my nonfiction books. It's a place to learn more about the elements of the story text. And in this case, we learn more about language and sense of place in your Where We Are From. What was important to you about writing the back matter as individuals, because you individually have information and as a group? And can you speak to the role and impact of your illustrator, and I know you already have, but of your illustrator, editor, book designer, to bring out the themes and threads of both the back matter and the story text? Because you can see, as you, John, you were pointing out too, there are threads, design threads running throughout this book, both in the story text and in the back matter. So can you speak a little more to that?
Yeah, we love to talk about the back matter. I think most picture book writers probably do, or just, yeah, love that. If we're, especially we're dealing with all of this history, all of us, I think, felt a strong responsibility to be accurate, to have accurate visual representation of people's, even when there's not that much information, archival information to be had, or it's pre, photography. And so I think that, we wanted to add more back matter because we bring in a lot of history. So much of the history that we include is hard. It's about hardship. We mention slavery. We mention the US Dakota War. We mention we imply, and then I talk in the back matter about the US possession of Hawaii, the Kingdom of Hawaii. And, John has Scottish and Irish history, and that's about British colonialism. I mean, there's all of this reality that's coming into what becomes the American story. That I don't think I haven't seen in any other picture book that is has these, lineages of just kind of 4 sort of random people, but who represent a lot of other stories. So I know that, just speaking for myself, I felt a lot of pressure to get things right. We did a lot of fact checking. Carol did a lot of fact checking. We, like John said, we went back and forth with Diane to make sure that just the tiniest details that we could know would be correct, and that we wouldn't harm, anyone. So in that sense, we really tried to balance these different things of, hard reality while making it palatable, right? Or digestible, not palatable, but digestible for our readers' age range. But then, of course, it's right. We know that it's adults buying the books and choosing them, selecting them, presenting them, sharing them with children and young readers in many cases. So, the role of themes and threads. One thing that I'm not sure, maybe John remembers whose idea this was, but like little things like making some of the words in color, and that we thought that it would help readers slow down and just take time to absorb different, place names and event names, or places that we wanted to highlight as, yes, we know that every reader might not know about this, but this is it's an important, there's probably back matter about it, and a lot of it too, I think, especially for those of us who are writing from marginalized spaces, that it's hard to pick and choose what we want to highlight, because so much of our histories can be missing or distorted. Oh, here's my 7 pages or however many, what are the few things that I want to highlight that also, this also kind of subtext of how we became writers. And so we wanted to include, why story or language or books were important to us as kids. So it was kind of a lot. We just, but we got so much support, and that by the end, I think we all felt like what made it into the book was really the most essential things in this kind of balance. And then the back matter is a great space to be able to say more, give more historical information. Just fill in some of those gaps. I hope that answers some of the question. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. John, do you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, Caren, as Carol Hines, AKA Queen of Back Matter, is just incredibly helpful in encouraging writers to think about what goes in the text and what's back matter. And this process, there was so much information that we all had. And it was a process of just kind of trying to be as concise and go to the essence. And so there was all kinds of other information we had that was, valuable to share. And as Sun Young was saying, this is painful, traumatic history. Anybody who goes back in their family goes back to, really difficult times, really difficult places. And one of the things Carol asked for was to specifically address that question of where do you come from? And Sun Young said she would give it a go first. And what she wrote was just so powerful and so beautiful that we all just said, yes, that's it. So that's in the back. And that's just worth reading for everybody, because every time I hear that read, I hear something different or learn something new. And I think with that back matter, Sun Young, you were talking about that different colors for the word. I think some of that came because when we were working together, we all had a different color. We wrote in different color to keep track of who was saying what. And we liked that a lot and mentioned that to Carol and mentioned it to Danielle. And so that was one way that was pulled through. And even in the back matter, I've got the same color I had on the Google Doc. So I'm very happy about that. But I think it's a way where it really acknowledges, and Caren, you did this, so beautifully. It really acknowledges that there are young people who this book is going to be read to, or who are going to read the book, who are going to focus on the text. But there are also adults and teachers and certain kids, certain older kids who are going to want to learn more. And that back matter is there. And it provides an opportunity to explore more deeply. And I just want to say one last thing. I love the way you introduced us, Caren, by talking about the people who've been here for 12,000 years and the importance of story. This is a place where people have been telling stories for thousands of years. And now we're just telling our stories about this place. But it's an acknowledgement that that's where the storytelling here was originally. And a lot of us who are newcomers, it can be very valuable to learn from those people about this place and about this land. And I think that there's an element of that comes through in where we come from. And we are all grateful to Diane for leading the way on that as well.
Wow, thank you. That was so interesting. And again, such a beautiful book, written, illustrated, designed, and that back matter really extends our learning. And it's just as important as the main part of the text. And I think everybody will feel that way when they read your book. So thank you. Wow, that was just wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you. Before we close, is there anything we didn't cover or you would like to say before we have sort of our conclusion? Anyone like to add anything else?
Just to say thank you to librarians.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to
Yeah.
librarians.
In
Thank
time
you
of-
to our teachers and our librarians.
Yeah, just thank you to librarians and everyone making space for books and picture books especially. Yeah, love them.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to close with these words. Thanks to our tremendous children's literature category finalists. Thank you all. And to all of you watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards Steward Organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. And you can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Tuesday, May 2nd. That's the evening that the winner in this category and 8 others are finally revealed. So join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets are just $22. Visit the website friends.org/MNBA for more details. So I want to thank all of you so much. We so enjoyed meeting you and listening to all that you put into your writing and your art into these beautiful, beautiful books for us. So thank you again. Take care and goodbye.